All right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's ATI hosted training and education powered by GovMates. I will be your host for today's education session. I am Meg Kearns, the Director of Engagement for GovMates. We're just kind of letting everybody file in here as we get started. If you have joined us for either an ATI virtual matchmaking session or something in person, such as an institute, my voice may be familiar to you if you have popped into the networking room. Additionally, I am the host of the GovMates Next Gen podcast that features tech talks from many of our ATI and GovMates members. So to get us comfortable and set up for today's discussion, I would like to provide a few participation reminders to ensure your very best experience for today. So first things first, remove those distractions. We're going to keep this to about an hour. So silence your phone, close down those 8 tabs that are open on your devices, try and stay out of your email if you can. And then we also encourage you to be active in the chat. You should see the Q&A button along the bottom as well as the chat box off to the right side of your screen. If you would give that chat box a test run, just so we know that it's working, we would appreciate it. So in the drop down above the text box, you'll either choose to panelists and attendees or choose to everyone, depending on what version of Zoom that you have. And then say hello or let us know where you're joining us from. If you're joining us from like a really nice spring vacation location somewhere, bonus points to you. We've seen a couple people there. So finally, there will be a recording, but we do suggest that you pay active attention so that we can answer any of the questions that come up during today's session. So we have a quick appetizer. I see Charleston. I see Germantown, Maryland. Fantastic. Hello, everybody. Welcome. But for our quick appetizer today, for those of you who may not be aware, I wanted to give a brief overview of what GovMates is and our purpose in helping small businesses and non-traditionals. At GovMates, we do provide teaming and matchmaking opportunities to connect large system integrators and what we call our bigs with small businesses and non-traditionals looking to get a foot in the government door. So we hold virtual and in-person matchmaking sessions that facilitate that 10-minute coffee date that gets our GovMates nation talking with new individuals. From there, they can NDA it up or move into more information or whatever the next steps are, what they deem necessary post-chat. Question there is, how does matchmaking work? Glad you asked. All attendees make a profile at govmates.com. Takes about 15 minutes, and you only need to do it one time. Once you're in the system, you're eligible for future matchmaking events and opportunities. And from there, if you're going to participate in a specific matchmaking event, we use a formulaic and methodical approach to help ensure that all of the one-on-one meetings that we facilitate are with businesses who meet each other's needs. So typically based on capabilities and technologies rather than NAICS codes alone. Aside from that, we do provide training and education like this in the form of webinars or more of our style, an in-person GovMates Institute. We bring a half day of specific themed relevant content panels to a room of about 60 or 70 GovMates nation decision makers. And we typically include good food too, because you can't learn on an empty stomach. Hopefully everyone has had lunch or is having lunch as we speak. It's a good time for that, but don't get up. If you don't have your food, wait and do it later. Additionally, we do use our network of partners and industry friends to provide resources and introductions should the GovMates Nation need anything to help their businesses grow. So access to capital, business development, SCIF space, legal counsel, capture and proposal support, accounting support, and the list goes on and on there. So if you need anything in this space, or you're interested in becoming part of the GovMates Nation, because you're not already, several of you already are, so welcome. Hi, good to see you. You can sign up at govmates.com after we finish today's presentation. But just so you know that that is there as a resource for you, provided to you by ATI as well. So now I am going to stop my share and let Tan do hers, because I get to move into introducing today's speaker, who's going to bring us kind of the meat and potatoes of our training. Tan Wilson, thank you for joining me today. And as you're getting things pulled up here, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what makes you an expert in your field?
Ooh,
that hard question.
That's a really hard question, because
we do it every time. We do it to you every time.
I know, and you would think that I would be better prepared for this. So I'm Tan Wilson, president of Intellect, and the term expert just I don't know, that makes me feel weird sometimes, but I'm really a practitioner. I'm not a trainer. I don't do training sessions and stuff like that, but I like to share with everyone what I've encountered, the tried and true, the good, the bad, the ugly of what I've seen out there. So I've sat in a lot of people's shoes. My background is I'm actually a chemist by training. So I do have a bachelor's in chemistry and political science. Weird combination, but it works for me. And so I came up through the ranks of analytical chemistry. So a lot of this, the technology, the technical aspects of what the government buys really kind of resonates with me. I've been in business since 2008, been in government contracting since 2004. I came down here to manage a large government program. So I've seen it from the operational perspective, from the customer delivery, and also from how do you bid and win government contracts. And then, oh, by the way, you have to manage those contracts. So there's probably not a seat that I haven't sat that I can't speak about. But our company does everything from BD capture to proposal support, contracts compliance, risk. We've got a new tag coming out that I'm going to be launching shortly. So I don't want to spoil the news because it's going to be kind of, I like to kind of shake the trees a little bit and be a little edgy and push the envelope on things. So what I'm really hoping for today is to really kind of give you some of my goals. We'll talk about some vehicles, different approaches, to really give you a good framework for when you go in to write a compelling proposal, what the planning is that you need to kind of take into consideration, giving you a little perspective on maybe what the customer is looking for, and using that as a way to help you then succeed in winning these contracts. What you will not find is I will not be providing you a very academic approach to writing. I'm not going to be teaching you how to write prose or anything of that nature. My forte is on the strategy part, right? So you really need to start with what is your strategy for tackling and getting these contracts. And it starts off with getting the right vehicle. So if you want, Meg, we can go ahead and just kind of jump right into to the presentation and
Definitely.
our session goal. So I subscribe to the KISS method. What we do is highly technical. What you do is highly technical. But at the end of the day, it's these proposals are being read and evaluated by non-technical people sometimes. So you've got contracting folks they just know contracting. You've got other people who will be evaluating your proposals from a technical standpoint. So the KISS method really is the best method. And proposals and winning contracts and government contracting, it's not rocket science, but there are many established experts out there that make it so difficult. And it's like this elusive, like, ooh, government contracting is, so hard. It is in that you really do need to kind of, understand and level set from a background perspective, like how does the government operate? How do they buy? Why is it that they buy? What the services and the products that that you're trying to sell, and then understanding like where to go, right? So we'll talk a little bit about different ways of getting to the government. The bulk of our discussion is going to be around how do you demonstrate and explain to the customer sometimes maybe a very complex service, a complex product. Sometimes you're solving some challenges that the government may not even realize that that they have. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And clearly being able to try to articulate some very difficult things to the government in a very compelling kind of way. So the key word today is going to be compelling, right? If you don't walk out of this session with anything, is that you're going to understand what compelling means. And it's very different than being compliant. And we talk in the proposal business a lot about compliance. Proposal managers, that's all they care about is compliance. A really good proposal manager will talk to you about how is it compelling. And a lot of that rests on the shoulders of the highly technical SMEs that you have, the smart people who are in the room, the business development professionals who really understand and know the customers. And so, proposals and writing in particular is a group activity. It's a group effort, it's a team effort. And if you think about it as like a three-legged stool, if you don't have one leg on that three-legged stool, your proposal is going to crash and burn. That stool is going to break. And so we'll show you how to kind of pull all that together. And then at the end of the day, though, it's a lot of what and why the government makes contract awards will be based on where have you done this before, your past performances. And so I thought it would be really good to kind of close out this whole session with being mindful, as you go through this process, you should always be thinking about where have we done this before? How did we perform? Did we meet, the customer's requirements? Were we able to exceed their expectations? Different things like that. And so the selection of past performance is really kind of the make or break part of your proposal. You're all technically smart. You can all explain to the government exactly what it is you do and why your product is really great. But to make it compelling and have them understand why it's best for them and why it's going to serve and meet their needs is not only as important as demonstrating to the customer where have you done this before. And so we'll close out with past performance. I think we're going to be monitoring chat and stuff. I'm not going to be able to kind of see that, but if you have comments along the lines, Meg, stop me, interject. I tend to talk really fast and roll through things. So I'll try to define things the best I can because we work in the world of acronyms and terminology, that we may not all be familiar with.
Definitely. And like Tan said, if you have questions, Q&A box is great. Chat box is great. I will be monitoring both of those. And I already have some things that I want to make sure that we hit on. So as we move through this, I'll make sure that we bring those up as well. You've already brought up some good points and I'm like, I have questions.
Oh.
I'm like, I'm ready.
Inquiring minds want to know. Okay.
Exactly.
So so we'll jump right into it. And Meg, I think this is a great place for you to start with some SBIRs and STTRs.
Yes, definitely. So recently GovMates actually hosted an in-person institute, and our first panel was on OTs, SBIRs, and STTRs. So if you are already here, you are part of some sort of OT consortia, you are part of this planning, and you already have experience there. Also, if there is more information needed on any of the way the consortium model works and things like that, ATI is hosting a OT consortium model webinar on June 16th. So we'll get you information for that later. So today I am going to focus on the SBIR STTR portion of this. It's a lot of alphabet soup, as we kind of alluded to already, but we're going to jump right in. So SBIR actually stands for the Small Business Innovation Research Program, and it is a competitive awards-based program used to encourage small businesses to engage in federal R&D with the potential for commercialization. On the other hand, you have STTRs, which stands for the Small Business Technology Transfer Program. If I can get through this without tongue twisting, this is going to be a great day. It is a partnership between small businesses and nonprofit research institutions in a formal collaboration, specifically in phases 1 and phases 2. And I'm going to get into the phases very briefly here in a quick minute. It's used to bridge the gap between science and commercialization that results in innovative solutions. So to make it simple, STTRs do need to be backed by a lab or academic foundation through which the research is guided and presented. SBIRs do not need to have that, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It's just not the most important factor as that collaboration is considered. To be considered a small business, typically in this space, it has to be US owned, there should be 500 employees or less, and their technology needs to be something that is unique to the space, or at least interesting enough to warrant further research and development. So something that we haven't seen before. Siri's trying to talk to us. So getting into the phases of these programs and what they mean for competing businesses. So a phase 1 portion of a SBIR or an STTR is typically about $150,000 to $250,000 contract that facilitates concept development or proof of concept there. This is where you get to discover exactly how your solution is going to work and what it is going to do. So in depth to provide solutions to the government's specific problem. The phase 2 contract, where we all want to get to, funding is based upon the results achieved in phase 1 and the scientific and technical merit and commercial potential for the project that was proposed for phase 2. Typically only phase 1 winners or awardees are eligible for phase 2, but there have been things where they've kind of jumped straight to a phase 2. SBIR and STTR phase 2 awards are generally under $1 million for 2 years. Generally. And this is where you get to develop the actual product or solution for use. You then have phase 3, and the objective of phase 3 is for the small business to pursue commercialization objectives resulting from all of the work you did in phase 1 and phase 2. But this is like, you came up with it, now go forth and conquer. The SBIR and STTR programs do not typically fund phase 3. At some federal agencies, a phase 3 may involve follow-on non-SBIR or STTR funded R&D contracts or production contracts for products or the processes or the services that are intended for use by the government itself. So that's that commercialization piece right there. Also, certain agencies, as is noted at the bottom there, so it says participating agencies, certain agencies have SBIR only or both SBIR and SBIR opportunities. And those are USDA, NIST, NOAA, the Department of Education, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Transportation, and the Environmental Protection Agency for SBIR only. And those with SBIR and STTR would include NASA, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, the DoD, and the Department of Health and Human Services. So all of that is to basically say that these are avenues, and from the work that we have done and the people that we've talked to, a really good takeaway from this is if you're going to pursue a SBIR or an STTR, definitely designate somebody in your company to be like that expert, because it's hard for somebody in BD or in capture to say, hey, like, we're going to do this, go and do the regular BD stuff, but also become a SBIR expert. If you have the opportunity to do that and to designate one person to be like that expert, definitely do that, because it's a full-time space.
Oh my God, no, thank you. That just, and I come from a technical background too, and I'm like, oh my God, no. So
yeah, but those are great places for highly technical, which many of the people on the line here are ready and poised for that. But it's it's another avenue above and beyond what you're already doing.
Super. Yeah, and so on the other side of the house, on the professional services product side, I'm just going to touch on the next few slides just real quickly, because I really want to get into like the meat of our discussion here.
Agreed.
Is another way for you to find some other vehicles that might be suited for your services too would be to go to the acquisition gateway. You can go in there, you can search and look at the different types of vehicles, because not every vehicle will buy what you're selling, services or products wise. And so you really do need to kind of go to the right place and research that a little bit further. GSA also has contracting vehicles or the multiple award schedules too. And they have different categories that you can actually like come up and pull on, and that's on the GSA MES categories website. Anything from facilities categories to human capital, industrial products, everything that the government needs, they will buy, and GSA is most likely the primary vendor in which they will be buying those from. So again, I'm really kind of glassing through a lot of these, but some of the terminology, I just want to make sure that, like as we talk about different things and whatnot, there are some nuanced differences between the different types of vehicles, right? There's some words that the government and industry uses kind of interchangeably, and you'll get these slides. You can kind of go back, as a point of reference. But IDIQs are like indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity type of multiple award contracts. Those are very different and can be very similar to other types of multiple award contracts. And then again, they're different from government-wide acquisition contracts. So they're not all created equal. They're not always the same, but I think it's really important for you to have like a really good point of reference. And then let me throw in a third on that one, BICs, right? We hear a lot about BICs, especially those in the IT services area, the professional services. These are the best in class vehicles, and not every GWAC out there is considered a best-in-class vehicle. You have to meet certain threshold and entry requirements as dictated by the Office of Management and Budget in order to be classified as a best-in-class. But those are government-wide type of vehicles where any agency can buy off of it, so long as the services are aligned with what the intent of those vehicles are. And the last one is BPAs. And so blanket purchase order agreements, it's really interesting. I was just on a conversation with a company where I sit as an advisory board member, and we talked about BPAs. And so BPAs are blanket agreements that are established with specific agencies where they can award you a BPA. There's no money obligated to that, which is really kind of great. And so those are dictated and guided by different types of FAR regulations. And so for that, it's BPAs, let's think about this way, and I'm going to overly simplify this. A BPA is kind of like an IDIQ, but there's no money obligated to it. There's no money associated. There's no, there's certain ceilings on which, certain orders can be awarded. But it's really kind of a low risk for the government, where they can go in and order from you above and below a certain type of threshold, depending upon the types of services, and whether or not it's being procured through GSA or through the agency directly. That will dictate, again, a lot of how and how much the government can order from you. So like there's a whole lot of creativity behind the BPA that's really attractive. So now that we've got like that whole point of reference for, who you want to sell through and what kind of vehicles you want to, use to get to you, let's talk about, I moved too quickly, approaches to demonstrating your competency, right? It's like, you're totally capable, you know your stuff, it's like, how do you convey that, right? Like that's the really, like, people really hit a brick wall when it comes to like, oh my God, how do I explain this to someone? In order for you to be able to demonstrate your competency, you really kind of need to know thyself, right? Let's talk about, and think about who are you and who's the customer, right? And we'll dive into a little bit further into like the who of this equation here. What are you proposing? Are you proposing a product? Are you proposing a service? Are you proposing a solution? Is it a new technology? Whatever it might be, you really have to have a handle on like, what is it that you're proposing? How are you going to provide the delivery? That's the meat of when we talk about a technical approach, right? A technical approach is the how part of a proposal. How are you going to do this? What kind of process you're going to be using? What technology, what tools are going to be using in order to deliver that type of service or that product? What goes into developing that product? Why should the customer buy from you and give you a contract? That really is like sometimes the $800 billion question, right? It's like, why should they? And that's where we're going to really dive and peel back that onion a little bit, is like the why and making it compelling. And then at the end, where have you been successful before? That's the past performance part that we're talking about. So you're going to have some key themes across the board that we're going to be talking about.
I'm going to pop in. We've had some in a previous life. It was my job to work with companies to create their capability statement. And a lot of companies are like, well, when you get asked that question, why shouldn't they? Why should they buy from me? Well, why shouldn't they buy from me? I'm great. I'm like, that may be true, but we need to actually identify and put that down in writing. And sometimes that does become difficult. So kind of going through this process and figuring out how to answer these questions, it may seem very obvious when we talk about like, who are you and who's your customer? Okay, that might be obvious to you, but conveying that in a way that is succinct and understandable is kind of that difference there, that barrier.
Right. Yeah. And these are why we do, reviews, right? We get someone who's from the outside, get someone who's not familiar, get someone who's not drinking your Kool-Aid to really kind of validate your substantiations, your claims. And so that's a lot of what I do. Like, the percentage of the time is that, hey, Tom, this sounds really great to us, but if I don't understand it and I don't get the, the value proposition to it, ultimately your end customer and the evaluator isn't either. So let's just kind of dive into it, right? Like the who and why. These are your discriminators and hot buttons. We use those terms so much in the proposal industry. And a lot of times, we don't put enough attention to that. And we think, and we just assume someone says that this is a discriminator, that it's like, you don't have to validate that. You don't have to substantiate that. You really do. So, a key discriminators about the offer is like, or the product or the services is something that's unique to you, right? To the offer. So anytime I say offer, I'm talking to you, audience here. It's really like the beginning of being able to define like what is the key features of your offer, of the offer. And so we talk a lot about features and benefits. And if you see at the bottom there, it's like themes, which we'll talk about, which are like win themes, is when you add your features, add your benefits, your discriminators, and your proof points, right? That's how you kind of develop, like that's the equation for developing a really great theme. And so when I say that, like, let's keep it simple, I really do let's break it down into the individual components and tackle each one at the same time. Because if you were to tackle it all together, it would be very, very overwhelming. And you wouldn't have the building blocks in order to kind of come up with this type of an, final theme or, from that equation. So, sometimes a discriminator doesn't have to be, usually it is something that's unique to you, but at the same time, you do need to have those offsetting discriminators, right? So if your competitor says, that they have a specific discriminator and that, like they provide, such and such a service or a product and, it solves this problem. If your product or services meets the same thing too, you do have to add that. You do have to reference it and mention it as one of your potential discriminators to kind of diffuse and offset their discriminator. If you don't say it and you're assuming that the customer knows about it, that is like the kiss of death. Never assume the customer knows anything about you, no matter how much you've been in front of them, how much you've discussed them, because the likelihood of someone evaluating this proposal that has no clue who you are, they're not going to be able to come to that conclusion. So just assume that whoever you're speaking to or writing to knows nothing about you. So yes, you need to kind of call out, like who you are and what your discriminators are. And then, these discriminators that you're listing are going to sometimes they will substantiate some of your claims. And so when we go later into talking about some features and benefits, some of the claims may be, maybe it is, you are the only provider, only manufacturer, of this, okay? Saying that without substantiating, like why is, it's not as effective, but as you can see, when you put those two together, they become really, really powerful. So one of the things that I always test, and this is what why I love color review so much, is when I read a proposal, I'm going through there and saying, so what and how. I like that if I read a section and I can answer the so what, then that's a really well written section, right? So there's keys, tricks to that. So write down what you think your discriminators are, and then look at each one of them and honestly say, so what? If you can't define that, then you need to kind of either cross that off or better define it and substantiate that. So the next part to that too is companies spend a lot of time on themselves. They talk about themselves. They talk about how great they are, that their shit doesn't smell and all this other stuff. And, it's like, yeah, the customer loves you, or just because you've done something before, that will only get you so far. You are writing a proposal for the customer, right? You are trying to address their needs. So it has to be all about them. And so the next exercise you have to go through is to determine, like, what are your customer hot buttons, right? You need to build a profile. You need to understand the customer. Who are they? What program is this? What office are you, speaking to? What are some of their problems? What is their, what are their mission? What are some of their goals? There's, there's like reports out there that will, they will explain to you, some of the key challenges that they've had. Where the agency or that office has fallen short. So really kind of build that customer profile to understand and really know who the customer is. 9 times out of 10, when you lose a proposal, it's because of lack of customer intimacy. And this is where we talk about in the business development and capture phase, is when you're learning and capturing more details, not only about the program that you're bidding on, but also understanding the customer. If you don't understand the mindset of the customer, let's say, for example, you're going to bid something that's hugely innovative, right? It's like really aggressive, leading edge technology. You think it's like the greatest thing since sliced bread, okay? You bid that, and you like tout, that this is something that's part of your win themes, okay? And that you have a discriminator because, you're the only person who does that, just to find out the customer has no interest in it. They've either tried it before and they haven't, they had no success with it, or they're risk averse, right? And you're going to be, proposing like an innovative process, but like the government does not, that agency or that office does not want innovation. Then you've missed the mark. You really haven't really understood what the customer wants. And so giving the customer what they want may not always be what they need, but that's exactly what they're asking for. So win the contract, get in there, and then help the customer ultimately end up getting what they need.
It becomes help us help you.
Exactly. The KISS method, right? Help me to
Right.
help you,
Help
right?
me to help you. That actually brings up a point. We did an interview with a contracting officer who had worked with FAA, Army, and the Air Force. And she was talking to us about how when she reads these proposals, there's oftentimes she says, I'm not the technical person. She goes, I'm the contracting officer. She's like, I'm making decisions and I'm reading through all of these things. She goes, so if you have all of this jargon in there that sounds really great because it's what you do, but I have no idea what that means, it's French to me. She's like, I have no idea what you're saying. She goes, so I need it to be written in a way that makes sense, solves my problem, and then I can give it a good yes without, being worried that I don't understand what I'm agreeing to.
Yeah, exactly. And so that leads to like really good things, right? Like let's avoid certain phrases. Like I could have gone on and listed things like for hours, right? Like, so these are kind of like my pet peeves. Mission critical, leading edge, best in class, cutting edge. There's so many, like industry terms that are kind of used out there that I'm like, when I bristle, like I see it, like I bristle at them. So I'm not saying don't use these phrases, but use these phrases and substantiate them at the same time, right? But these phrases alone, making hollow statements or making superfluous type of statements, is really not making your case as far as like the compelling aspect, right? So that leads us to like the what and the where, right? Like the features and benefits, like what are you proposing and where have you done this before, right? The substantiation part. So features and benefits. I spent a lot of time at the beginning of a proposal talking to the customer about features and benefits. And features and benefits can be about a product, a solution. It could be features and benefits about the team, right? Like you've put together a team, or your company in particular has certain key features, certain discriminators. Why are they a benefit to the customer, right? Connect the dots for me. Making the statement and just kind of tossing it out and throwing it out there does me no good. It's like you got to spoon feed the customer sometimes and lead them to the conclusion that you want them to walk away with. And so, being able to clearly describe your features and benefits, if you can master this, then you're more than half the way into making the proposal compelling, because everything else after that is super easy. Trust me. The benefit needs to highlight what's important to the customer. So back into like the hot buttons part, you have to really understand and get into the mind of the customer so you know what type of features and benefits to talk to. And so there's like this industry example out there about going in and buying a car, right? Like the minute you go in to try to buy a car, the salesperson has got you sized up. If you walk in with kids, they're going to try to put you in something that, maybe family friendly. If you walk in, like in hot leather pants and, lots of makeup and, whatever, they have already kind of like sized you up. So you need to kind of size up the customer and understand the customer to know like what features to really kind of call out to them in order to make it compelling. Advantages to your features need to solve that problem. And so again, that's kind of, a pretty easy to understand kind of thing. Win themes. Holy Jesus, this is a conversation that can last for days. I can tell you what, win themes are the bane of my existence.
But that first line that you have there, it makes me a little bit sad, because I'm like, as a marketing person, I love sales slogans. And I love that that's a good thing. We take so much time putting those together. You're telling me that that's not a win theme. Like, I get it, but I can't use it.
You can, and you can substantiate it, right? So
okay,
like
all right.
every time someone asks me a question, I'm like, it depends. And I have this one person who tells me, Todd, when you answer a question, the only phrase you're not allowed to say is it depends, but it really does depend, right? So yeah, so slogans and taglines, I get those all the time. And it's not a win theme unless you've crafted it and have, are able to, again, substantiate it with a proof point, tie it to a discriminator, and does it really, a lot of times slogans are all about us, right? And so win themes are all about the customer. Proposals are about the customer. And a lot of times, we say a proposal is a marketing tool. It's a marketing piece, right? It really is. And so there's that delicate balance between the marketing part and the part where it's like, you got to have enough meat in there to be compelling. And so I can always kind of blow holes through someone who doesn't quite understand what the customer is saying or what the requirements is solely based on the fluff words and the things that they've used. The development of Win themes a lot of times is really, really rushed. And one of the things that I find is that a lot of times they are created in a vacuum. It is done by your salespeople, okay? They see things in like rainbows and purple unicorns, and like the sky is just perfect in the world all the time. And so they really do need to be tested by the technical people. They need to be tested by the executives of the company. You need to be tested by people who understand the customer. So test them, like, and make sure that they really are kind of punchy and to the point, and captures exactly what you need. A lot of times too, I see themes being reused, and that's like the kiss of death. Like, you can't propose a theme, on one proposal for the USDA and then turn around and try to do the same thing for the DoD. Totally different environment, totally different customer, most likely very different set of services. So don't rinse, repeat, reuse. I'm not saying you can't reuse certain ones, especially if they're tied to something that is truly a company discriminator or a product discriminator. But be mindful of the customer part, the requirements part, right? Tailor it for that specific audience and that specific requirements. It's the same thing as proposal reuse. We do proposal reuse all the time, and I can always see a bad copy and paste because someone didn't change the copy and paste part.
That's what I was going to say. So I can't, like, copying paste is not going to be my best friend here, especially if I'm trying to write something that is, as we said, the word is compelling. If I need somebody to read it and to understand it, it has to be written specifically for them. There are going to be things that are the same across what you're doing because it's what you do, but making sure that you're writing it in a way that hits home is going to be the differentiating factor there.
Yeah, exactly. And so the other one that people try to do is claiming incumbency, right? In our business, we call it incumbentitis. Oh, we're the incumbent, that's why you should give us the contract. Oh, we're the incumbent, that's why we know this program better. But it's like, knowing the program is part of it, but being able to provide a value add and being able to describe that. I've seen incumbents lose because they got lazy. And what's really great, and other people are like, oh, there's an incumbent, I can't unseat them. Yeah, you can. I've unseated a lot of incumbents because every incumbent is vulnerable because they all suffer from this. And so the incumbent contracts are truly prime for the picking. If you know the customer, if you've gone in there, if you can, like we'll talk about ghosting, too. It's like, if you know that the incumbent has failed miserably, or they did not meet their deadlines, they were offering or providing a solution that was half-baked, you've got a better solution, you've got a better product, and you can ghost that. Like those are like tactics that we'll talk about. Like, you can use someone's Achilles to your advantage, and sometimes to slice it, shamelessly, and walk away with their contract. So it happens every day. It's just, again, goes back to your capture, right? And so the other part of Win themes is, again, like I said, supported by proof points and clearly defined benefits. So again, I think I've beaten the whole features, benefits, why it's important, and how it feeds into the Win themes. But at the end of the day, everything will fall short if you can't prove it. So, one of my favorite phrases that I like to use out there is from one of my favorite presidents, and I don't want to turn this into a politics, but Ronald Reagan's saying is trust but verify, right? Trust but verify. That resonates all the time. And so I trust that my BD people are telling me the truth, and that, yes, that's based on, their information, their perspective, but you have to understand the lens that they're looking at it from, right? I will always verify that somewhere else. Same thing with a teaming partner tells you something, or anybody really. Trust but verify. And so the proof point is your validation, right? This is where you're substantiating your claims. A proof point can be so many different things. It could be, if it's a product and you've done testing and you've done, like testing against other types of products, right? Like you're building up and gathering your metrics, like any type of metrics that you can provide to support your claim on something, that's irrefutable. Like you can't argue with that, right? You can kind of play the metrics, you can play data, to your advantage. You can maybe minimize, certain things. But that's probably going to be one of your best ways of really kind of providing a proof point. Another way, and we'll talk about this in past performances too, is use your past performances and use the work that you've done through different types of case studies, different examples of, that have been documented by the customer in a status report, anything that you can actually prove that can be validated by someone, a quote from someone, CPARs. Not everybody's, contract or work will be issued a CPARs, right? So, the contractor performance reports. And so, if you have a CPARs, I get this a lot. Can I quote out of a CPARs? Can I yeah, you can, you know what I mean? It's your feedback. It's your data to own. And so provide that. So one of the things that I love to do, and we'll talk about this, in like the writing, the how part of, demonstrating this, is to, really start to kind of gather, collect, store all of your success stories, your kudos, write them up. That's one of the best things, is when you are closing out, or even at interval times through a contract that's long, is to kind of take routine pulses on the project and start to kind of discuss and gather incremental success stories, because memories are short, people come and go. And so you don't want to lose a lot of that, great knowledge and history of performance, that you've had with the customer and on a contract because your PM left or was fired or, whatever. And so mine those stories, because that really kind of proves the value of the company. It proves the value of, your contracts, and it will help to substantiate your claims, and the exercise much easier.
Put a little file together on the side of your email that just every time you get some, when somebody emails and is like, hey, great job, or whatever, it's rare that in this industry, people reach out and say, hey, I really liked how you did that. But when they take the time to do it, throw that email in just to a separate folder so you can get it back later. With the CPARs option as well, we had a client at one point who was looking to gather them so that they could use them for something like this later on. And they said, can we ask? They're like, can we ask our, who we're working with, can we ask them to submit one? And the consensus was like, yeah, what the worst they're going to tell you is no, or that they don't do them. But if they do, or if they have the opportunity, if you've had great success with it, ask them to do it. And if they do them, the opportunity is there for you, and then you can use that. And again, it's that proof point that's going to be outside of something you created personally.
Yeah, exactly. And my rule of thumb is you can always ask. The worst they could say is no.
Right.
So, but if you don't make the ask and assume that you can't, you never know what's going to happen, right?
And make sure you're doing successful work before you ask that question, because we would hate for them to do something that you don't want to actually have out there.
Well, that's a precursor to the past performance part, the PPQs, right?
It is.
So, so stand by for that discussion, because that's a whole other can of worms we'll open up next. I love how you and I kind of you're reading my mind here.
I'm right here. I'm with you. I'm in this.
All right. We're in it to win it here. Okay. So how do you do this? Right. There's so many different ways that you can do this. And this is not, trust me, this is not an all-inclusive approach. There's so many different, ways to show, from a proposal writing and response perspective, how to demonstrate and illustrate all of these great discriminators and win themes that we've now, talked about and discussed and whatnot. One of the easiest things to do are just theme statement boxes. They're theme boxes. They can look like this, which is an example, or they can just be like a solid bar at the top. They can be text that's don't use red text, okay? But text that's in another accent color, right? My colors are blue, green, and purple. So in mine, I will always accent things like that in a purple. So if you want to do it in blue, do it in a call, but you can do it in a theme box. But as you develop these themes and you write, when you write a certain section, you start off with an understanding, the approach, the proof points, and then and the proof point, and then your takeaway. So think of a theme as kind of a summary of that section, a summary of who you are, or the departing comments or statements or thoughts. What is your leave behind? What is the takeaway that you want the customer to have? Again, leading them to water, spoon feeding them,
It's like the resume of each section. I have your objective statement.
Exactly, exactly. So again, not to get too technical, but you could do something simple as that. Another way to kind of, help your case, to make you look better than your customer, than your competitors, is to like throw shade on your
I'm
competitors.
so excited for this part because when we were talking about this and it just literally says throwing shade, like I'm ready. This is
Yeah,
business, but I'm ready.
yeah, it's nothing personal. It's just business,
It's
right?
just business.
And you don't have to be nasty about it. And for the old timers here, like those of us who are a little bit grayer, I color, so like I am a gray. But for those of us who've been around for a while, the throwing shade is what we used to call ghosting. It's like, and now ghosting for these millennials and like these kids now who are in their 20s, the 40 under 40 type of people. um, you know, they don't understand what ghosting is. And I was corrected one day. So I no longer use the term ghosting when I speak. I throw shade and I can
Okay.
throw it down all day, every day. And this is the fun part. So, it's like, this is where you're highlighting your competitors' weaknesses. And you can always tell someone who does not know their space is you don't know who your competitors are. And I hope you know who your competitors are, what they're providing, how they're providing it, whether or not they're successful in it, and then blowing holes through what they do, right? And so you do need to throw some shade. Like what you're trying to do is you're trying to neutralize their strength. Okay, don't call it out. But at the same time, making sure that you are showing yourself in the best light as you can, right? Every competitor has a weakness. You know how to do that. And this is a very difficult activity to do because you want to kind of call them out, right? You want to get a little snarky with them. And sometimes I'll start off with a really snarky statement, and then I'll look at the statement and I'll tone it back and I'll tone it back. And, like there's other ways about doing it. And so that is really, really hard, is like, how do you neutralize? How do you not name something? And I think one of the ways that you could do that is like, instead of naming it particular, just name why it falls short, right? Like unlike others in the industry, their product is not capable of meeting the, whatever, the specs or the ramp time or, while ours exceeds this or has this, and then talk about your features and the benefits to the customer, right? So now you're taking a weakness that that the customer might consider as one of their hot buttons and then spinning it around into, oh, by the way, we saw this like a million years ago. Other competitors are just now catching up. But again, it will backfire if you do not validate this, right? So don't make a hollow claim if your system, if your process or your product is not fully baked. Okay, don't go out on a limb and let your salespeople be like, oh, like, yeah, we can do that. And like, no, you can't, because as much as you're going to be doing this for your competitors doing the same thing to you. And so you do really need to make sure that not only does the the statement resonate with the customer, but you can also validate that at the same time. So ways of doing this, the KISS method, right? Start off with a spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets. For you technical people out there, your science people, like spreadsheets are king. You can do so much with a spreadsheet. Just set up a spreadsheet with like, list your hot buttons. What's your approach? What's your competitor approach? And why is your approach better or the best choice? Okay. And if you can't, then you can't. Then now you need to figure out if your competitor really does have something in as a discriminator that is stronger than you, how do you mitigate that? How do you diffuse that, right? What is your approach to doing that? Because if you know that they're going to do that, you're going to have to somehow write it in your proposal to kind of avoid that, to address that. So some of the things, I apologize, like I've got cleaning people here, so I hope that there's not like a whole lot.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
Okay,
keep going.
Great. So things to avoid is, again, calling out the customer, inadvertently, highlighting one of your competitor strengths. So, like, again, that's a delicate balance, right?
Don't name names.
Don't name names, protect the guilty, in there. And at the same time, do not call out your weakness. And sometimes we do, right? You're trying to be really honest about things. And so that's like the gray area about proposals, right? Like proposal is not like a lie detector test. Don't lie, but don't make claims that are not true. But at the same time, let's maybe, like gloss over something, that maybe isn't quite ready to go prime time. So, be really kind of mindful about that. One of the other things, and the reason why I have this one kind of last, is action captions. Again, action captions are kind of the bane of my existence. I love them. I hate them. Some people love them. Some people hate them. If you're strapped for space because you've got 20 pages of materials and you only have 10 pages to like squeeze it in, I would not recommend action captions. Okay, they just take up way too much space. They tend to be really wordy. A lot of times I will just randomly delete an action caption because there's no compelling aspect of it, right? You're not telling me any feature of this. And action captions are usually captions that you provide for a table or for a graphic, right? And so tables you'll use for a number of different reasons to kind of jam a lot of information into bullets to circumvent the proposal size restrictions, or a graphic that overall like presents like your overall approach, or you're trying to demonstrate and illustrate something in a graphical depiction that may be really difficult. When you use words, things get lost in words. Okay, I'm a visual person. If I were to choose between like a full 8.5 by 11 page of words, I'm going to choose a half a page of graphics and the other half of the page with with words, because it demonstrates so much more and you can do so much more with it. But then the driving it home, the compelling part, the last like nail on this would be a really succinct and to the point action caption. Those are really, really hard. Even those who have been in the business for a long time have a difficult time with it. And a lot of times I just kind of scrap it because they're not just well thought out. I did have a proposal where we had over 50 graphics and I itemized every single graphic, the call out, what we titled the graphic and what the action caption was. And we just worked on action captions alone. Just that was one exercise in itself.
Right.
And so they can be very powerful if used the right way.
If they don't have a specific purpose, then they probably don't need to be in there.
Exactly.
If they're not proving something or adding to it, then we can just do away with them.
Exactly.
Save yourself the space.
Same thing goes with graphics, right? And so I didn't put that in here. It's like graphics, that's a whole conversation for like 3 days alone. Not going to be fitting in this like time. And we're like up against time here. But like the other way that you can do is like call out boxes. I think we all use this approach. Call out boxes can be for past experience. It can be for discriminators. I always recommend that you do call out boxes maybe in like 2 different colors so that you can kind of glance through the proposal really quickly and pull out the benefits or pull out a proof point, right? So a lot of times I'll have benefits and proof points in very different colors so that I can look at them faster. Features benefit tables, again, this is just an example of like team capabilities, right? The team capability is our feature, and then we've described exactly why is it a benefit to the customer. And so you can kind of read these through here for like an example of what we've used, before. So we only have like maybe 3 minutes, 2 minutes to kind of go.
Yep. And then if anybody has questions while we're doing this portion, make sure you put them in so that we can get them answered.
Yep. So I did want to touch on like the past performance part. Like, why is past performance, like important? It's a lot of times a third of the evaluation criteria. Again, it depends, right, on the evaluation, your section M of the proposal. They will tell you pretty much how and where they're weighting the important parts. So past performance is either usually like the second important factor, if not like the third behind the technical capabilities. So a lot of times the technical capabilities, then past performance. Every once in a while, depending upon the solicitation, sometimes like the management or the key personnel is like the second one. So past performance, factors 2 or 3, usually like in the second run. But it's super important, and it is kind of like the one thread that you can pull through all of this, because this is your proof point, this is your validation, this is where you substantiate. And so a lot of times there's not a whole lot of thought that goes behind the down selecting or the selection of past performances. Sometimes like people go and hurry with I'm bidding USDA. I'm just going to pull all the USDA proposals, like past performances that I've used before, and we're going to talk about that. Well, did you look at the whole size, scope, complexity aspect of it? Right. So like past performances are usually evaluated on those 3 criteria. And I've kind of given you some ideas as to, from a size perspective, it's the value, it's numbers. It's usually a numbers thing, right? The value, how many locations, how many materials, sometimes the staff, depending upon the contract, have you staffed the same number of, of staff on the contract that's similar to this one? And anything scope wise, I think you understand that too. It's like, how does it align against the requirements? How does it align against the services, the specs? Sometimes it's very specific. It has to be, have these specific specs. And if you don't meet them, then that's going to determine whether or not you use that past performance. And then there's a whole other element to that as to whether or not you want to use certain past performances based on like how you're going to score. And so past performance is a score on from a low risk to a high risk. Sometimes it's scale, sometimes it's weighted, sometimes you have points. But you always want to use the past performance that's going to like be the lowest risk. Or the confidence, the highest confidence level, right? So you might have low confidence to high confidence. And so the rule of thumb is anything with that agency or office is always more relevant than anything else with any other agency. If you're bidding a civilian opportunity, you want to use civilian focused type of references. If you're bidding a defense, you're going to want to use defense. Not saying that you can't use a civilian contract to use on a defense bid. It most likely they will weigh that a little bit or score that potentially a little bit lower, unless you can offset that by the other areas here, the scope and the complexity part. The complexity is the most difficult part, right? Like how complex is it? Sometimes it's super clear, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to read between the lines as to what's really important to the customer. So this goes back into like understand the customer mindset. Sometimes you can pick the wrong past performance references and you're totally missing the mark, right? Sometimes you're picking a past performance with an agency that has a beef with this one agency. And it's like, and if they don't get along, then you're not going to want to use that. Like the Navy, for example, there's different Navy locations. You may not want to bid a crane location if you're bidding a NAFC effort. So like understand the backroom politics of the customer is going to be really important in how you select which past performances. So, like the writing tactic for this is, follow the instructions, get the right people involved in the writing. It's your PMs, it's the people who are like executing this contract that's going to know, but really be able to describe it based on outcomes. Don't write it like an SOP. On this contract, we did X, Y, and Z for this customer. This is why we did it. That's great. But why you did it, how you did it, but the outcome of it, what happened, okay? What was the outcome of that reference is really the most important part. So knowing the right past performance and writing in a way that shows and demonstrates the outcome, I think is that same thread that we've been pulling through, is that show me. And if you haven't been able to clearly show that, then you've kind of missed the mark. So key takeaways. Follow the instructions and the evaluation factors, but know exactly where and how to get to the customer in order for you to demonstrate your capabilities. So knowing and having all this stuff is great, but using the wrong vehicle to get to them, not so good, right? Totally ineffective. A well-developed themes are driven by identified discriminators, features, benefits, and again, at the end of the day, it's all about the customer, right? So have you hit all the customers' hot buttons on that? Proposal win themes. Lead the evaluator, spoon feed them, lead them to that water, make them drink, and let them say, you are the best offer, right? Leave everything out on the table there for them. And then selecting the most recent and relevant past performance is super critical because 9 times out of 10, a proposal is lost either on the past performance because you scored too low and are too high of a risk, or you didn't price it right, which at the end of the day, all comes back to not knowing the customer.
Exactly. That takes us through a lot of things. We've got the trust but verify, we've got tying it all together, not just in a bow, and we've got the not being afraid to throw professional shade. I think I need that on a t-shirt, maybe.
Throwing shade.
Yeah, exactly. Just not afraid to throw professional shade. Just as a reminder to like actually putting yourself forward. This is where you do get to talk about yourself in the best light, especially if you have things to pull through on it. With that last piece, the proof points and the past performance, if I don't have past performance because I'm new, this is where I use some of those other pieces and, the things that I've been gathering in, in my email and in the other pieces and places that I can use there as I'm working to get some of these new contracts, correct?
Or it's a way to not bid, right? So past performance is usually that like that one entry barrier where they will separate that to determine whether or not you should bid. So
Okay.
one of the things that I do ask in that bid no bid process is, do you have corporate experience, which is different than past performance. Past performance is a demonstrated, proven contract where you've performed this before, whether it's commercial or federal. Or do you just have the capabilities, the corporate qualifications to do that? That will only get you so far. If the requirement states that you have to have X, Y, and Z in the past performance and you can't meet them, and there's no way for you to get a neutral means you don't provide any past performance. So the government can neither score you, like poorly for it, they can give you a neutral. But if someone has a neutral and then another or competitor has, like high level of confidence, you're going to ultimately score low,
Right.
On that in the whole grand scheme of it. So that's a bid no bid. And if you don't have it, I will always say don't bid.
And it might also be an opportunity for teaming there if you are kind of filling a
Yes.
hole somewhere else instead of going full by yourself.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Tom. Before we go, we are right at time here. Before we go, there are a couple of things that I do want to make everybody aware of as we're kind of wrapping up here. Thank you to everybody for being here. If you have not joined GovMates, as I said at the top, you can do so at govmates.com, 15 minutes, and you won't miss any information regarding our in-person or virtual matchmakings, as well as our training and education and upcoming events. Speaking of training and education, like this one, we have 2 more in this series so far scheduled. Our next one is going to be targeted for late July, and the topic is going to be subcontracting, so best practices for subcontracting on federal projects. Our 3rd session will be on IP and data rights towards the end of August, where we're going to be sure, and we'll be sure to email everybody final dates and registrations as those come about. If you're going to be in the DC metro area, June 9th, GovMates is hosting an in-person happy hour and networking session from 5 to 8 in Arlington. You can email me or for more information on registration. That's meg@govmates.com. And then finally, we are hosting our ATI exclusive matchmaking virtually on June 21st. So if you are wanting to do more in that space, make sure that you let us know you'd like to participate. You can email ati@govmates.com. It just says register me for matchmaking. We'll get your profile tagged and ready so that we can get you in on that sooner rather than later. So finally, thank you, Tan, for joining me today and providing a valuable session on, moving from high tech to high talk. And when it comes to our proposals, and to everybody who has stayed with us today, thank you for being here. We hope to see you on a future training as well as our June 21st event. And we hope you have a fantastic day. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.